pleasure to carry on the long-standing Boys State tradition of introducing the introducer. So, without further ado, to introduce this morning's speaker, I will bring up Mr. Spencer Nolan, your Boys State Commissioner of Agriculture.
Our speaker this morning is a longtime farmer who began his passion for the industry by reviving a farm that had sat abandoned for over 40 years located in the western end of Mountaineer County. He served in the United States Marine Corps for 20 years and retired at the rank of Lieutenant Colonel in 1996. In 2014, he was elected to the West Virginia State Senate to serve the people of the 2nd Senatorial District. The district he was chosen to represent in Charleston is one of the largest and most rural districts in West Virginia, containing parts of all the following counties: Marshall, Wetzel, Gilmer, Marion, Monongalia, Tyler, Doddridge, Calhoun, and Ritchie. In 2016, he was elected as the West Virginia Commissioner of Agriculture and is currently in his 2nd term. Kent and his wife Shirley still live on their farm in western Monongalia County. Together, they have 3 sons and 5 grandchildren. Please give a big Boys State welcome to the West Virginia Commissioner of Agriculture, Kent Leonhardt.
Well, what a welcome. Thank you all so much. It's certainly great to be here. You know, we had that little dry spell for a while, so I was driving down the rain, very grateful for the rain, and the radio said we've almost caught up to where we are, and we're still averaging about 2 degrees lower than the average temperature for the month of June. So that's all good news for the farmers in the state of West Virginia and agriculture as a whole. But I want to talk to you a little bit about, you know, you're all very young and you're thinking about what you want to do for your careers and where you want to end up in life. And I'm going to tell you, follow your heart, because you never really know where you're going to end up. And I'll give you a story. I'm the son of 2 Brooklynites. Yes, my parents were raised in Brooklyn, New York. I was born in Buffalo, raised in northern New Jersey, and my parents bought an abandoned farm in Pennsylvania when I was 8 years old that we used for vacationing. And I began a love of agriculture at that time, and we started going to the county fairs and the chicken barbecues at the firehouses that they used to raise funds, and that passion slowly built. And I ended up liking the idea of being a veterinarian or studying wildlife management. So when I finished college, I trucked off to the University of Missouri, studying pre-veterinary medicine and wildlife management. You know, when you're young and all, you don't really care about making a whole lot of money, because I knew a government job wasn't going to pay as well as a veterinarian. But I decided to like that wildlife thing really a lot. So I decided to drop the pre-vet thing, study wildlife, and that was about the time Vietnam War was winding down. I'm sure you've studied a little bit of the Vietnam history in school. And the veterans, you know, they were a little bit more mature because they'd gone off to war and come back, and they were getting great grades compared to, my grades were good, but they were getting better grades. And because they had that veterans preference, they were getting all the jobs in wildlife management because it was veterans preference for state and federal jobs. So what does this young man do? Says, well, maybe I better join the service so I can get that veterans preference. So I'm walking down the hall one day, and there's this Marine recruiter in dress blues looking all sharp, and I said, well, maybe I'll go talk to him. Sure enough, within a couple hours, I was taking the test. Next thing you know, I'm off to have a physical. And I ended up joining the Marine Corps platoon leaders class that eventually leads to a commission as a 2nd lieutenant upon graduation from college. So I truck off to the Marine Corps with a commitment of 3.5 years. And I decided I liked it. I said, well, I'm going to stay in the Marine Corps as a career, and the Marine Corps was generous enough to allow me to do so. And so the only wildlife I ever managed was Marines. Yeah, some people got that. But you know what? But I still had that love of the agriculture and the outside in me. So as a young captain, I decided I wanted to come to West Virginia. West Virginia was beautiful. It was something you could afford. And so I found a piece of property that was abandoned in 1957. And there were still some neighbors cutting a little bit of hay on about 11 acres of the property. The house was falling down, and I was energetic. I said, I can fix this up. So we ended up buying that. And that was 1982. And then we ended up retiring there when I retired from the Marine Corps in 1996. And that's when we went full head on into it. So, you change. You don't know what you're going to do sometimes, but life just slowly takes you on. And I said, I followed my heart, and I want you all to do the same thing. Find a job you really love, and you'll never really work a day in your life. Although I seem like I work an awful lot, but I'm having fun doing it. I'm not ready to retire yet. Now, remember that thing I said about being a pre-vet? I now have 5 veterinarians working for me. Like I said, you never know where life's going to take you. And I also want you to know, never give up, too. There's this job that you get elected. Did you talk about conservation district supervisors at all? It's a nonpartisan, elected on the ballot. There's 2 per county in the state of West Virginia, and they run the soil and water conservation programs. They work very closely with DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, and they also work with the Natural Resource Conservation Service arm of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. They also oversee 170 flood control dams in the state of West Virginia they're responsible for. Well, those elected supervisors, 2 per county, are supervised by what's called a state conservation committee. Guess who chairs the state conservation committee? The Commissioner of Agriculture does. So not only do we have the responsibility of the Department of Agriculture, but we also have a responsibility of the West Virginia Conservation Agency, which makes it a very big job that people don't realize. This week alone, I was in Washington, D.C., talking about the Ohio River Basin, because that was just listed as the 2nd most endangered river in the country, Colorado River being number 1. And we have our whole border, almost our whole western border is the Ohio River. And we also have a part of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And that's what I was doing yesterday. That's why I couldn't be at the Capitol yesterday, because I was working with the Eastern Panhandle watershed groups. So we've done an awful lot of work. And you can all be proud of West Virginia in its conservation efforts, despite we were an industrialized state. And, we had a lot of pollution in the rivers and everybody, that's pretty well known. But West Virginia is the first state to be meeting the 2025 goals of the Chesapeake Bay restoration. And you're doing it with an elected Commissioner of Agriculture, and you're doing it all voluntarily. There's 6 states in that watershed, and West Virginia is the only one meeting the goals. And we're doing it voluntarily, and we're doing it with elected commissioner. The other 5 states have appointed commissioners by their governor. Only 12 states in the United States elects the Commissioner of Agriculture. And I kind of like it that way. Now, I got to get along with the governor. I got to work with him. But he can't fire me like a Secretary of Ag from another state who doesn't want to do what he wants to do. I can oppose the governor if I want to, or I can do what he would like, because I don't work for the governor. I think it's a better system here in West Virginia. Most of the states are southern states that are that way, and we have also, and then Iowa and North Dakota are the other 2 states that are elected. So it's very important that you all understand what we do in the Department of Agriculture. The Commissioner of Agriculture touches the life of every West Virginian every day, and they don't even know we exist sometimes. I've asked a lot of people out there, and they'll say, what do you do? I said, I'm the Commissioner of Agriculture, and they'll go, what county? It's very important that we have an educated electorate that understands what each of these positions do, and to make sure that they study. I was on the campaign trail once that you're studying government back in 2012 when I ran for ag commissioner in 2012 the first time and lost. So I say, follow your heart and never give up. I went and I gave a speech during early voting, and I had a young woman come up to me and said, sir, I owe you a big apology. I said, what's that, ma'am? She goes, I voted for the wrong man. I voted for the name I recognize. I early voted because the election day hadn't come yet. And I said, well, then my trip to Lewisburg was worthwhile all the way from Monongalia County for that morning. Because what she told me was, I promise you I will never vote again without studying for each of the candidates. And that's what you all need to encourage people to do. Learn who the candidates are. So to me, the drive was worth it for her to say that. Now, I lost that election, but she said, I will make sure other people vote for you. And I said, yes, your penance for not voting for me is now to go find 10 people to vote for me. And I think she probably did do that. We only lost that race by about 3 points. But so, like I said, I don't want to take up a lot of time. You got a busy day. What you're doing here is so very important. I appreciate that you all have stepped up to come to this camp, to come to Boise State, to learn about our government, and to learn about the things that make this state and this nation great. You have a comment, sir.
You brought up about internships with the legislature, and I thought maybe they would like to hear a little bit about that.
Well, I don't know exactly how it works. There's usually somebody in the legislature on the House and the Senate side that coordinates interns. I would talk to the respective Senate President's office and the Speaker's office to find out about those type of interns. And each of the offices have interns too. Now, my department has interns, generally a college student coming in from this for the summer.
They can just reach out and contact.
They contact our office, and we're on the internet. It's easy to find the Department of Agriculture. You can find us. Yeah. I have another question. Yes, sir.
My name is Leonhardt. I'm from Mountaineer County. 2 days ago, the Attorney General was in here. He said we beat the Clean Water Act. What does that mean for West Virginia?
Beat the Clean Water Act?
Well, not act. The one to the United States Supreme Court, we argued against.
Oh, okay. The waters of the U.S. Okay, the waters of the U.S. rule. Okay, the Clean Water Act, and you're right, you're in right ballpark, back in 1973, said the federal government has jurisdiction over navigable waters. And that's part of the basis for what the Chesapeake Bay Restoration Program has been under. And a lot of money's flow through. The Department of Agriculture actually does nutrient management planning over 93,000 acres in the Chesapeake Bay so that the farmer knows exactly what he has to put on the soil so that there's no runoff going into the rivers that ends up in the bay. So that's just in a thumbnail. They've also done a lot of work with the sewer systems to help try to clean up the bay, and West Virginia, like I said, is one of the few states. But the waters of the U.S. that was brought up by the Obama administration, then again by the Biden administration, said, and our Supreme Court our Attorney General, rightfully so, I believe, filed a lawsuit joined by other states saying it's an overreach of the waters of the U.S. because the waters of the U.S. gave the federal government jurisdiction over streams, even ephemeral streams. And an ephemeral stream is a stream that usually only happens in wet weather or rainy weather. Like the rain we had today, streams that would normally be dry would be running. The federal government was trying to take control of all that. Now, there's no way they could monitor everything that's going on those lands. And we, like I said, in West Virginia, we're doing a great job in conservation voluntarily. This would have been a federal government saying, you will do this, this, and this. And you never know when they're going to show up and say, well, you're not doing it exactly the same way. There was a case of a chicken house that was going to be fined $35,000 a day because they found a little bit of chicken manure outside the house. and the West Virginia and the Farm Bureau got behind that farmer, and they did win in court. The EPA eventually withdrew that. So if you were to take all the streams and rivers, if you look at a map in West Virginia, and you flatten it, and you take those streams and what they call the waters of the U.S., the federal government would have controlled 93% of West Virginia. I mean, it was a huge overreach. So that's what they were talking about. Yes, we did beat that overreach. And that's what the courts are for. You know, that's why we have a court system, and I'm glad it worked. And I'm proud of our Attorney General for leading on that action. He had to do it twice since he was in office. So, does that answer your question? Okay. Yes, sir. That's a great question. You know, farmers are a resilient group. They learn how to adapt. One of the things that we do at the Department of Agriculture is, you know, we're regulators, unfortunately. You know, what everybody runs on is the business development and growing agriculture, but really that's only 10% of my job. But 90% is the regulation. So what we try to do at the Department of Agriculture is, you know, we're trying to educate before we regulate. A lot of what we do, we're contracted with the federal government to do. That's those laws that have already passed and whatnot. Farmers are learning the new techniques. There's always studies and research being done on different seeds. You've seen these high tunnels going up, you know, the plastic hoop houses around the state. Those are actually a conservation practice. But at the same time, they extend the growing season for our farmers. And you can control the humidity and the temperature of those just by raising and lowering the sides. But the reason that it's a conservation practice is because now the soil's not exposed, and you know the rains come, it hits the plastic, and the water's controlled, and you're not hitting that open soil to cause the erosion. And those are put up in cooperation with the Natural Resource Conservation Service. So farmers are learning to adapt and change things. You know, different growing season, different growing lengths, and the farmers are doing well. I am proud to report, and I'll get to you next question. I'm proud to report that you've probably heard that the cattle numbers in the United States are down 4% from last year. West Virginia's herd numbers were up 5,000 head. So we're beating the trend. We've got more sheep, we've got more things. West Virginia agriculture is doing great. And since I've been in office, and I'll brag a little bit, our farmers market numbers have tripled. What did we do? We changed some of the regulations. We got away with license fees from each county. And a farmer only has to get one free permit from the department. And the only reason there's a permit is so that if there's a disease outbreak, it can be tracked. It has nothing to do. So we got rid of the fees for farmers markets from each county, one free permit, we can track it, and you know, we just want to make sure everybody's healthy. If there's an outbreak of a food-borne poisoning, we want to be able to track it and make sure that it stops and nobody else gets sick. But that's a lot of what we do. And then our animal health thing, got a shout out to all the members of the Department of Agriculture that work in animal health particularly, because we are one of 3 states, Hawaii being one of them, and it's not going to happen, and Louisiana and West Virginia, the only states without the avian influenza outbreak, which is devastating, which is why you saw your egg prices went through the roof, because it was 78 million birds had to be put down because of avian influenza. Most of them were egg layers. So your state has avoided the avian influenza outbreak from the last year. So a little bit of luck, a little bit of good work. And yes, sir.
You know, we live in a time where I think
Well, that's a great question too, and he's absolutely right. I had a little discussion on artificial intelligence from the watershed folks yesterday. And artificial intelligence, you know, it was one inquiry they figured out takes 1/3 of a joule of electricity. Whatever that means to anybody. But artificial intelligence can start making decisions for us. You know, obviously you're going to hear a lot about fear of artificial intelligence taking over on us, but I don't think we're quite there yet. But we want to make sure we use that technology. And one of the technologies that I want to do, the Chesapeake thing we talked about, the Chesapeake Bay and all, they used a lot of meeting the goals using a model. They say if you put this conservation practice in, this less sediment will go into the streams and rivers. And they plug that into this model. But I think we need to start getting away from that model. We need to, and technology has changed so much since 1973 that we can now put sensors in the streams and they can report the data back, and we can analyze what's happening in the streams, and not using a model as much to predict what's going to happen, but actually get the scientific data of what's happening in our streams and rivers. The next biggest issue that somebody asked me earlier, what's the biggest conservation issue that's going to come up in the state? And it's going to be nationally, and that's the forever chemicals, the PFAS. We really don't know the extent of that and the long-term consequences of that. So it's also going to be precision agriculture. Computers are going to say how much fertilizer you to put in this spot on the field, and your machine, your planter, and it's not going to affect West Virginia as much because we're not a big row crop state, but that planter is going to go on down the road planting seed, and when the soil needs a certain amount, it's going to drop the fertilizer. So you're going to have less and less fertilizer used, less inputs in, making farming a little bit more profitable. And then the use of drones. I mean, I used to, at one point in time, my wife and I had 5 leases on top of our farm, and I'd have to go out and check. Wouldn't it have been great to have a drone just to fly over? Oh, there's all the cows. We're in great shape. I don't have to drive over there and walk up that hill anymore. But those are the technologies that are going to help. Yes, sir.
Do you think that the cost of vertical farming is worth its high yield?
That is an awesome question. I think vertical farming is in its infancy. Right now, the cost, the biggest problem is the labor issue. They're having trouble getting the labor. We've had some vertical farms that are coming into West Virginia that have talked to us. For different reasons, they haven't really taken off. Some vertical farms are struggling financially. They're struggling with 2 things. They're struggling financially and with labor. But I do think vertical farming is going to be part of to that other question eventually that the other gentleman raised about changes in the climate and what we need to do. But also, you got to remember too, if we can get vertical farming going, and we can get the wages right, and we get the price of food, because everybody wants to eat from a safe, affordable, and abundant food supply. We don't want to be like our forefathers, where 70% of our budget was eating, and now we're at 20% of our budget is eating. We don't want to go back to that 70%. You can't, as everybody knows, if you're studying government, once you give somebody something, it's really hard to take it away. And we don't want to increase the price of food, because you saw what happened when food prices started to be inflated. So we're going to get there eventually. But got to remember, like I was saying, with vertical farming, if you're growing year-round, that's a year-round job. Right now, a lot of the problems we have in agriculture is they're part-time jobs in the summer, and then the people, that's why we would bring labor into the country. They'd work for a while, and then they'd go back out of the country because they didn't have a job full-time. So vertical farming has an opportunity for full-time jobs, has an opportunity to shorten that distance from where our food is grown to where it's consumed. Now that's energy efficiency as well. If you don't have to pay the trucking, and we've seen with the trucking and the supply chain issues that we've had, tomatoes coming from California, if they have a problem out there, we have no control. If we can get the vertical farming and all the other things and the high tunnels that extend the growing season, we can make our food resiliency and sustainability a lot better. So it's a work in progress. We're not there yet. I think it will eventually get there. I think it's going to become absolutely necessary. And we here in West Virginia, we have the energy to provide to it. You know, we're a natural gas state. We're sitting on plenty of it. And that's still cheaper on the environment and better for the environment than paying the trucking. And I will tell you this, I did ask WVU when I first took office, if I put an acre under glass, what's that equal to how many field acres in California? Turned out to be 200. So I don't have to plow up 200 acres to get tomatoes year round, you know, and consumers have changed. You don't remember this, but when I grew up, I couldn't get fresh tomatoes in January. We had to eat canned tomatoes. So 24/7, you know, the consumer demands fresh tomatoes now. So that's how we get there.
Sir,
Yes, sir.
with all the natural gas wells in West Virginia and all those well pads, do you see a problem with our forestry, the wildlife, and the stream?
Actually, I'm not seeing a problem. I haven't seen a problem yet. We're actually growing timber at 2.5 times the rate of harvest. So we can do a lot more harvesting in our timber industry than we are. Right now, the timber's starting to go into a little slow period. People have changed their tastes. They don't want, you know, we're one of the top hardwood producing states in the country. And I will tell you a little bit more about what the Department of Agriculture does for your education first. We do the phytosanitary inspections for forestry. Forestry Department's not under the Department of Agriculture. Forestry Department, that's under the governor's office, does 3 things. It manages the state forests. It does the conservation look on logging operations, and it also does fire control. But the forest health and all the other things is under the Department of Agriculture. So I'm very much in. So when a logger, timber company, wants to ship logs or lumber, rough cut lumber overseas, they have to be inspected for those bugs so we don't ship them out. Generally, we're looking for the bugs they already gave us, but it's also a non-tariff barrier to trade. And we have to apply for that. Your Department of Agriculture, we do it here in state and can issue a certificate, or they can take it to a port and have USDA do it. Most of our timber companies choose the Department of Agriculture in West Virginia to issue those permits. And another thing about regulation, sometimes you don't need legislation to change things. And that's a great question. I'm glad you brought it up, because what we were able to do when I first took office, I had some timber companies saying the inspection process is too cumbersome. So we're working with USDA, working with our foreign trading partners. We were able to change the way we did our phytosanitary inspections, and the first year we issued 1,000 more permits. At $20,000 a container, that's about $2 million of economic growth that we had, just by changing a procedure, not going through regulations. So there's a lot of different things we can do. I think we're probably running out of time. I could go on for hours. I'll tell you what, I'll make a deal. I'll stand outside on the porch here for a little while. If anybody else wants to talk to me, I'd be more than happy to. Do we have time for one more? We got one more. Okay, I'm sorry I missed. I've got those artillery ears. I'm sorry.
Do you think that planting back what's been cut down is enough, or do you think more needs to be done to restore old growth Appalachian forests?
Well, actually, there's a lot of being done to restore the old growth Appalachian, because like I said, we're not cutting near as much as we're growing, so it's slowly coming back. Our state forests, to me, are a treasure. They should never be logged. Some people say they should be logged because it's a waste if a tree dies and falls. I disagree, because when the tree dies, it makes hollows. It's good for wildlife. It's a great place for our kids and our grandkids to see old growth forests, because it's the only place we have 150-year-old trees. There's a couple on my farm still, but they're starting to die. But I let them lay. Bears like to roll them over and eat the grubs and things of that nature, so it's all good for wildlife as well. We have to properly manage our resources, and I think we're getting better at it. And that, I'll just say this one thing. The New River Gorge, and I'm glad you brought it up, that the big thing on tourism, how it's going to help the tourism in the state of West Virginia. And they talk about tourism as an economic driver. What are the two things that makes tourism so great in West Virginia? Cleaner waters and beautiful forests. And who's responsible for both of them? Your Department of Agriculture. You better do a good job. Thank you all very much.